The morning sun spilled through tall windows of the Richardson mansion, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Elena wiped a thin layer of dust from the grand piano that stood in the corner of the living room. Her small hands moved quickly but carefully over the sleek black surface. 2 years of cleaning this house, 2 years of polishing this piano, and she had never once touched its keys. Every morning was the same routine. Elena arrived at 6, prepared breakfast for the family, then cleaned the main rooms before they woke up. The Richardsons barely noticed her presence unless something wasn't done to their liking. She was like a ghost moving through their lives, visible only when needed. "Don't forget to polish the silver today," Mrs. Richardson called out, as she breezed through the living room in her silk robe. "We're having guests tonight, very important guests." Elena nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I'll take care of it. And make sure the guest bathrooms have fresh towels, the good ones, not the everyday set." "Of course, Mrs. Richardson." The woman paused, eyeing Elena as if seeing her for the first time that day. "You'll need to stay late, we'll need help serving. Wear the black uniform, not your regular one." Elena's heart sank a little. Late nights meant missing the bus, which meant paying for a taxi she could barely afford. But she needed this job. "What time should I expect to finish?" Mrs. Richardson waved her hand dismissively. "Hard to say. These things go how they go. I'll pay you the overtime, of course." Before Elena could respond, Mrs. Richardson's phone rang and the woman walked away, already deep in conversation about flower arrangements and wine selections. Throughout the day, the house transformed. Florists arrived with massive arrangements of white roses and orchids. Caterers set up in the kitchen, pushing Elena to the side as they commandeered her usual workspace. A cleaning crew came to handle the outdoor areas and windows, while Elena focused on the details inside that only she knew how to do just right. By 6 o'clock, Elena had changed into the formal black uniform reserved for special events. The dress was a bit tight around her shoulders. It had belonged to the previous housekeeper, who was smaller than her, but it would have to do. She pinned her long dark hair into a neat bun and added the white cap Mrs. Richardson insisted on for authentic service presentation. The first guests arrived at 7. Men in expensive suits and women dripping in jewelry filled the enormous living room. Elena moved silently between them, offering trays of champagne and tiny appetizers on silver platters. No one thanked her. Few even looked at her. She was part of the furniture, as invisible as the air they breathed. "Dad's promotion is a big deal," she overheard Thomas Jr. saying to a group of his friends. The Richardson's son was home from college for the weekend. "Managing director of the entire East Coast division. We're talking serious money now." His friends laughed and clinked glasses. Elena moved past them, careful not to draw attention. "It's a shame about the pianist," Mrs. Richardson was telling another group of guests. "Down with the flu at the last minute. I had hired Pavel Sokolov, you know, the one who performed with the symphony last month. Absolutely brilliant. Such bad luck," one guest sympathized. "Music would have been the perfect touch for the evening." Elena continued her rounds, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates. The grand piano sat silent in the corner, its lid propped open as if waiting for the performer who would never arrive. The dinner itself was served at 8:30. Elena helped the catering staff bring out course after course of elaborate food. Conversation flowed as freely as the expensive wine. Mr. Richardson gave a short speech about his promotion, thanking his colleagues and family for their support. Everyone applauded. No one mentioned the household staff who had made the evening possible. After dinner, the party moved back to the living room for dessert and drinks. Elena was clearing the last of the dinner plates when she heard Thomas Jr.'s voice louder than before. "Hey, I have an idea," he called out, the effects of too much wine evident in his flushed face. "Since the pianist couldn't make it, why don't we have some entertainment anyway?" His friends looked at him curiously. One of them asked, "Did you learn to play when I wasn't looking?" Thomas Jr. laughed. "Not me, but we have other options." His eyes landed on Elena, who was stacking plates nearby. "Hey you, our maid, come here a minute." Elena froze. She set down the stack of plates and walked over cautiously. "Yes, sir? Do you need something?" You clean the piano every day, right? I bet you've picked up a thing or two. Thomas Jr. was grinning now, his friends starting to catch on to the joke. Why don't you play something for our guests? A few people nearby chuckled. Elena felt her cheeks grow hot. I don't think, she started, but Thomas Jr. cut her off. Come on, it'll be fun. Everyone, listen up, he called out to the room. We're going to have some music after all. Our maid has volunteered to entertain us. The room quieted down as people turned to look. Some seemed embarrassed by Thomas Jr.'s behavior, but many wore amused smiles, ready for the entertainment of watching the help make a fool of herself. Mrs. Richardson, who had drunk several glasses of champagne, clapped her hands. Oh, what a marvelous idea. Elena, be a dear and play something for us. Elena looked around the room at all the expecting faces. Mr. Richardson looked uncomfortable, but said nothing to stop his son or wife. The other guests were watching with expressions, ranging from second-hand embarrassment to cruel amusement. I really should get back to the kitchen, Elena said quietly. Nonsense, Mrs. Richardson insisted. We insist, don't we, everyone? A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone pushed her gently toward the piano. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. Thomas Jr. was now sitting with his friends, phone out and ready to record what he assumed would be a humiliating moment. This is going to be good, he whispered loudly. One of the caterers caught Elena's eye from across the room and gave her a sympathetic look. There was no escape from this situation. If she refused, she risked angering her employers. If she played badly, she would become the evening's joke. Slowly, Elena walked to the piano. The crowd parted to let her through, some people already struggling to hold in their laughter. The polished bench gleamed under the chandelier light as she sat down. She adjusted her position slightly, a movement that seemed oddly practiced to the more observant guests. Her back straightened, her shoulders relaxed. Her hands hovered above the keys for just a moment. Time seemed to slow down. Elena stared at the black and white keys, so familiar, yet so distant. How long had it been? 2 years since she'd left home. 2 years since she'd touched a piano. Would her fingers remember? Would the music still be there, waiting inside her? She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the awkward plunking of someone who didn't know how to play. Then Elena pressed down on the first note. A single perfect tone rang out through the room, so pure and clear that several people visibly startled. It hung in the air for just a moment before Elena's fingers began to move. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the space, flowing from her hands with a grace and precision that instantly silenced every whisper. The complex piece, one of the most challenging in the classical repertoire, unfolded effortlessly as her fingers danced across the keys. Thomas Jr.'s smirk faded. His phone lowered slowly as his jaw dropped open. Mrs. Richardson's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Mr. Richardson turned around so quickly he nearly lost his balance. Elena's eyes were closed now, her body swaying slightly with the music as the piece built from its gentle beginning to increasingly complex passages. Her small hands stretched impossibly across the keys, reaching chords that professional pianists struggled with. Each note was perfectly weighted, each phrase shaped with an emotional understanding that spoke of years of dedicated study. The guests stood in stunned silence. A few of the older attendees who regularly attended the symphony recognized not just skill, but rare talent in the playing. One woman put her hand over her heart, moved nearly to tears by the unexpected beauty. The joke had backfired completely. Instead of humiliation, they were witnessing something extraordinary. The maid they had barely noticed, the woman who cleaned their messes and served their food without complaint, was playing with the mastery of a concert pianist. As the piece reached its emotional peak, Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard in a flurry of notes that seemed impossible for human hands to execute. Yet she never faltered, never missed a single note in the intricate passages. The music filled every corner of the room, transforming the atmosphere from one of shallow celebration to profound appreciation. In those moments, power shifted in the Richardson household. The invisible became visible. The servant commanded attention not through demand, but through undeniable talent. Every person in the room, regardless of their wealth or status, was equally captivated by the pure expression of human capability. And as the final notes approached, not a single person was thinking about the party, the promotion, or their social standing. They were simply listening, completely present to the extraordinary music flowing from the hands of the woman they had invited to play as a joke. The last note hung in the air like a spell. For several seconds, no one in the room moved or spoke. Elena's hands rested gently on the keys, her eyes still closed as if waking from a dream. The silence was complete. No clinks of glasses, no whispers. Not even the sound of breathing seemed to disturb the moment. Then someone in the back of the room began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined in until the entire gathering erupted in thunderous applause. Elena's eyes fluttered open, almost surprised to find herself sitting at the piano in the Richardsons' living room, surrounded by their guests. Thomas Jr. stood frozen, his phone still held limply in his hand, recording nothing. The smug smile that had been on his face minutes earlier was replaced with a look of pure astonishment. His father moved first, stepping forward with an expression Elena had never seen on his face before. Respect. That was... Mr. Richardson struggled to find words. That was extraordinary. Truly extraordinary. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. Thank you, sir. Mrs. Richardson pushed through the crowd, her earlier tipsy demeanor replaced by wide-eyed wonder. Where did you learn to play like that? That wasn't just good, that was professional level. The guests had circled around the piano now, their earlier dismissal of Elena completely forgotten. A gray-haired woman in an expensive blue dress leaned forward. My dear, I'm on the board of the City Symphony. I've heard professional pianists who couldn't play Chopin with that level of emotional depth. Who trained you? Elena's throat felt tight. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her music, so long since she had allowed herself to even think about it. The words came slowly at first. I studied at the Conservatorio de Música in Caracas. I was there for 8 years. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, That's one of the top music schools in South America. Did you perform professionally? Another guest asked. Elena nodded. Yes, for a few years I played with the Caracas Philharmonic and as a soloist in Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina. Thomas Jr. had finally lowered his phone completely, his face flushed with embarrassment rather than alcohol now. But why are you... He couldn't bring himself to finish the question. Elena understood anyway. Why was a concert pianist working as a maid? It was the question written on every face in the room. The answer was complicated, tied up in politics, economics, and personal tragedy, but she gave them the simple version. Things changed in my country. The economic situation became very difficult. Many musicians lost their positions as cultural. Funding disappeared. I had an opportunity to come here 3 years ago and I took it. What she didn't say was how she had sold her beloved piano to pay for the journey. How she had arrived with only one suitcase and a dream of continuing her music career. How visa complications and the need to send money home to her family had led her to take the first job she could find, cleaning houses. How the Richardson position had come later, offering better pay but demanding such long hours that her dream of playing again had slowly faded. An older man stepped forward, his expression serious. I'm Professor Chen from the Conservatory of Music. May I ask what else you play? Elena felt a flicker of excitement at meeting a fellow musician. Most of the standard classical repertoire. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff. Rachmaninoff? Professor Chen's eyebrows rose. His works require exceptional technique. Elena's fingers twitched slightly, muscle memory responding to the composer's name. His Piano Concerto No. 3 was the last piece I performed with an orchestra before I left Venezuela. This statement caused another stir among the guests. Even Those with limited musical knowledge knew of Rachmaninoff's Third, one of the most technically demanding concertos ever written. Professor Chen glanced at the piano, then back at Elena. "Would you play something else for us, perhaps something by Liszt?" Elena looked to Mrs. Richardson, suddenly remembering her position in the household. "If it's all right with you, ma'am." Mrs. Richardson, still looking stunned, nodded quickly. "Of course, please. Play whatever you like." Elena turned back to the keys, considering her options. The request for Liszt suggested they wanted to see technical skill. She could choose his Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 with its famous runs, but it felt too showy for this moment. Instead, her hands found the opening chords of Liszt's Liebestraum No. 3. The gentle, dreamy melody floated through the room. Unlike the Chopin piece with its technical fireworks, this was pure emotion. A love dream, as the title suggested. Elena's touch was delicate, bringing out the song-like quality of each phrase. As the piece progressed to its more demanding, middle section, her technique remained flawless, but it was the tenderness of her interpretation that brought tears to several listeners' eyes. When she finished, the applause was immediate but somehow more reverent than before. People weren't just applauding skill. They were responding to something deeper, the universal language of emotion that transcends barriers of language, class, and circumstance. "That was beautiful," Mrs. Richardson said softly, dabbing at her eyes with a cocktail napkin. "Truly beautiful." Mr. Richardson cleared his throat. "I believe we owe you an apology, Elena. My son's behavior was completely inappropriate." Thomas Jr. stepped forward, his usual confidence replaced by genuine contrition. "I'm sorry. I was being a jerk. I never imagined, I had no idea that you could play like that." Elena nodded, accepting the apology but unsure what to say. For 2 years, no one in this house had shown interest in knowing anything about her beyond her ability to clean and serve. Now, suddenly, they were looking at her as if seeing a completely different person. Professor Chen moved closer to the piano. "Ms. Vasquez, would you be interested in playing for some colleagues of mine? We have a chamber music series at the conservatory, and we're always looking for exceptional talent." Elena's heart skipped a beat. I don't have much time for practice these days. My schedule." "We could adjust your hours," Mrs. Richardson interjected quickly. "If this is something you want to pursue, of course." The offer seemed sincere, but Elena had learned to be cautious with sudden changes of fortune. "Thank you. I would need to think about it." A woman in a red dress stepped forward. Elena recognized her as one of Mrs. Richardson's closest friends, though she couldn't recall her name. "Do you have a proper work visa for performance? The arts visa requirements are quite different from domestic work permits." It was the question Elena had been dreading. "No. My current visa only allows for certain types of employment. Performing professionally would be complicated." A hush fell over the room. Immigration status was a sensitive topic, especially in this wealthy circle where many employed international staff. Mr. Richardson, however, looked thoughtful rather than alarmed. "I know several excellent immigration attorneys. If there's a pathway to adjust your status for artistic pursuits, they would know." His offer caught Elena by surprise. "That would be very generous, sir." "It's the least we can do," he replied, looking slightly embarrassed. Especially after tonight, the party had transformed entirely. Guests who had barely glanced at Elena earlier now approached her with questions about her musical background and training. A few asked for her thoughts on recent symphony performances or famous pianists. For the first time in years, she was being treated as a professional musician rather than household staff. Thomas Jr. hovered awkwardly nearby, clearly unsure how to process the dramatic shift in how he viewed the family's maid. Finally, he approached her during a lull in the conversations. "Have you played our piano before? When no one was home, maybe?" he asked quietly. Elena shook her head. "No, never. It wouldn't have been appropriate." "But you dusted every day?" "Yes." "That must have been torture," he said, a new understanding dawning on his face, like asking a chef to look at food but never taste it. Elena smiled slightly. "It wasn't so bad. I could hear the music in my head when I touched the wood. Sometimes that was enough." Thomas Jr. looked genuinely distressed by this admission. 2 years without playing. I can't imagine giving up something I loved for that long. Many people make much bigger sacrifices, Elena replied simply. Their conversation was interrupted by Professor Chen, who had been making calls in the corner of the room. He approached with renewed excitement. Ms. Vasquez, I've spoken with the director of our upcoming spring showcase. We had a pianist cancel for next month's performance, and there's an opening if you're interested. It would be a paid position. Not much, I'm afraid, but it would be a start. Elena's pulse quickened. What would I need to play? A 20-minute solo program of your choosing, plus accompanying our vocal students for 2 pieces. We could work around your schedule for rehearsals. The offer was tempting, more than tempting. It was everything she had dreamed of since arriving in this country. A chance to play again, to be recognized for her true skills rather than her ability to polish silver and serve drinks. But reality intruded on the dream. My visa situation. There are performance exemptions for cultural events, Professor Chen said confidently. The conservatory sponsors international artists regularly. We can help with the paperwork. No, it's not all right, Thomas insisted. I never bothered to think of you as a real person with a life and talents in history. That's messed up, and I need to do better. His parents looked surprised at their son's self-awareness. Catherine nodded approvingly. We all need to do better, Thomas. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room as the family collectively acknowledged how they had treated someone who had been in their home daily for 2 years. Robert finally broke the silence. Elena, why don't you take today off? Paid, of course. You were here very late last night and you'll need time to speak with Howard about the visa situation. We can manage without you for 1 day. Are you sure? Elena asked, thinking of all the post-party cleanup still needed. Positive, Catherine confirmed. In fact, I think it's time we all learn to manage a bit more on our own around here. It will be good for us. Elena gathered her things, still feeling as though she might wake up from this dream at any moment. As she prepared to leave, Thomas approached her again. Before you go, he said hesitantly, would you play something? Just 1 piece? I was pretty drunk last night, and I want to remember what it sounds like when you play. The request was so earnest that Elena couldn't refuse. She sat at the piano bench, considered for a moment, then began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece of otherworldly beauty that seemed to fit the strange, transformative morning. The gentle, impressionistic music filled the room. Elena closed her eyes, letting her fingers find the familiar patterns. The Richardson family stood silent, watching as the morning sunlight streamed through the windows and the delicate notes hung in the air. When she finished, no one spoke for several seconds, as if afraid to break the spell. Thank you, Thomas said finally, his voice unusually subdued. That was perfect. Elena gathered her purse and headed for the door, pausing only when Catherine called after her. Elena, Professor Chen called early this morning. He'd like you to call him back. Something about an audition for the symphony next week. I left his number by the kitchen phone. With a grateful nod, Elena stepped outside into the bright morning. The world looked different somehow, full of possibilities that had seemed unreachable just 24 hours ago. Her small apartment was a stark contrast to the Richardson mansion. Just 1 room with a kitchenette and bathroom, furnished, with second-hand pieces she'd gradually acquired. But today, even this modest space felt different. Elena moved to the window, looking out at the city sprawled below. For 2 years she had lived a half-life, her true self buried under the necessity of survival. The piano had been her identity, her voice, her connection to something greater than herself. Without it, she had felt like a shadow moving through the world unseen. 1 note. That's all it had taken to bring her back to life. Elena picked up her phone and dialed the number for Professor Chen. Professor? It's Elena Vasquez from last night. Mrs. Richardson said you called about an audition? His voice was warm and enthusiastic. Elena. Yes, thank you for calling back. I spoke with the symphony director this morning. She's very interested in meeting you. There's an opening for a pianist to perform Beethoven's Emperor Concerto in their spring series. The scheduled performer had to withdraw for personal reasons. Would you be interested in auditioning? The Emperor Concerto, one of the most magnificent pieces in the piano repertoire. Elena had performed it once before, with the Caracas Philharmonic, 3 years ago. The music was still in her fingers, in her memory. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I would be very interested. Excellent. The audition is next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Can you make that time? Tuesday was a workday, but with her new arrangement at the Richardsons, it would be possible. Yes, I can be there. Wonderful. You'll need to prepare the first movement for the audition. Do you have the score? No, but I can get one. She would need to visit the music library, perhaps buy a copy if she could afford it. Don't worry about that. I'll have one sent to you today. What's your address? Elena gave him her apartment information, still feeling as though she was living someone else's life. Yesterday, she had been dusting furniture and preparing for a dinner party. Today, she was scheduling a symphony audition. After ending the call with Professor Chen, Elena made herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, trying to process everything that had happened. There was so much to think about: the visa application, the reduced hours at the Richardsons, the upcoming audition, the possibility of teaching again. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Ms. Vasquez? This is Howard Goldstein, Robert Richardson's attorney. He asked me to call you about your immigration situation. For the next hour, Elena discussed her background and options with the attorney. He asked detailed questions about her musical training, her previous performances, her press reviews and recordings. By the end of the call, he sounded confident. Based on what you've told me, I believe you have an excellent case for an O1 visa. Your international performances and training at a top conservatory establish you as an artist of extraordinary ability. I'll need documentation, of course. Programs from your concerts, reviews, letters from musical directors you've worked with. Elena's heart sank slightly. Most of my documentation is still in Venezuela. I have some things, but not much. That's not unusual in cases like yours, Howard assured her. We can work with what you have and request supporting letters. From new contacts here, Professor Chen, for instance, and the symphony director if your audition goes well. Robert mentioned you might be teaching his wife. Yes, we discussed that this morning. Good. Establishing yourself professionally here will strengthen your case. Can you come to my office tomorrow to begin the paperwork? Say 10 a.m. Another appointment. Another step toward reclaiming her true identity. Yes, I'll be there. Thank you so much for your help. It's my pleasure. Robert was quite moved by your performance last night. He's not easily impressed. After ending the call, Elena sat in silence for several minutes. Then, slowly, she walked to her closet and pulled out a small wooden box from the back corner. Inside were the few precious items she had brought from Venezuela: photographs of her family, her conservatory diploma, a few wrinkled programs from her most important performances, and a single review clipped from a Caracas newspaper that had called her a rising star in the classical firmament. These fragments of her previous life had been too painful to look at during the past 2 years. Now she spread them carefully on her small table, reconnecting with the person she had been before, the person she might become again. A knock at her door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, she found a courier holding a package. Delivery for Elena Vasquez. She signed for the package and brought it inside. Opening it revealed a brand new score of Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 5, The Emperor, along with a handwritten note from Professor Chen. Looking forward to your audition. The piano practice rooms at the conservatory are available to you anytime. Just show this note at the front desk. PC. Elena ran her fingers over the crisp pages of the score. The notes were old friends, waiting to be brought back to life. But where would she practice? Her apartment had no piano, and while the Richardsons had offered theirs, she would need many hours of uninterrupted practice to prepare for this audition. The conservatory practice rooms were the answer. Professional-grade pianos in private rooms, available whenever she needed them. It was an incredibly generous offer. Elena changed her clothes and gathered her few musical materials. There was no time to waste. 6 days until the audition. 6 days to bring back the technical precision and emotional depth needed for Beethoven's magnificent concerto. 6 days to prepare for the opportunity that might change everything. As she headed for the bus that would take her to the conservatory, Elena felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. For 2 years, she had been invisible, her talent and training hidden behind a uniform and a dusting cloth. Now suddenly, she was stepping back into the light. The practice room assigned to her was small but well-maintained, with a Yamaha grand piano that responded beautifully to her touch. Elena placed the score on the stand, though she wouldn't need it much. The emperor was still in her memory and her muscles. She began with scales and arpeggios, reawakening her technique after the long silence. Then slowly she started to play the opening of the concerto, those magnificent cascading chords that announce the soloist's presence with such authority. Her fingers were stiff at first, missing the daily practice that had once been as natural as breathing. But as the hours passed, the old facility began to return. By late afternoon, she was deep into the first movement, working through the challenging passages, remembering the interpretive choices she had made years earlier. Time disappeared as she worked. The sun set outside the small window of the practice room, but Elena barely noticed. She was home again, not in a physical place, but in the world of music where she truly belonged. A knock at the door finally broke her concentration. A security guard smiled apologetically. "Sorry to interrupt, but we're closing in 15 minutes. Just wanted to make sure you had time to gather your things." "No, it's not all right," Thomas insisted. "I never bothered to think of you as a real person with a life and talents and history. That's messed up, and I need to do better." His parents looked surprised at their son's self-awareness. Catherine nodded approvingly. "We all need to do better, Thomas." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room as the family collectively acknowledged how they had treated someone who had been in their home daily for 2 years. Robert finally broke the silence. "Elena, why don't you take today off? Paid, of course. You were here very late last night and you'll need time to speak with Howard about the visa situation. We can manage without you for 1 day." "Are you sure?" Elena asked, thinking of all the post-party cleanup still needed. "Positive," Catherine confirmed. "In fact, I think it's time we all learn to manage a bit more on our own around here. It will be good for us." Elena gathered her things, still feeling as though she might wake up from this dream at any moment. As she prepared to leave, Thomas approached her again. "Before you go," he said hesitantly, "would you play something? Just one piece? I was pretty drunk last night, and I want to remember what it sounds like when you play." The request was so earnest that Elena couldn't refuse. She sat at the piano bench, considered for a moment, then began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece of otherworldly beauty that seemed to fit the strange, transformative morning. The gentle, impressionistic music filled the room. Elena closed her eyes, letting her fingers find the familiar patterns. The Richardson family stood silent, watching as the morning sunlight streamed through the windows and the delicate notes hung in the air. When she finished, no one spoke for several seconds, as if afraid to break the spell. "Thank you," Thomas said finally, his voice unusually subdued. "That was perfect." Elena gathered her purse and headed for the door, pausing only when Catherine called after her. "Elena, Professor Chen called early this morning. He'd like you to call him back. Something about an audition for the symphony next week. I left his number by the kitchen phone." With a grateful nod, Elena stepped outside into the bright morning. The world looked different somehow, full of possibilities that had seemed unreachable just 24 hours ago. Her small apartment was a stark contrast to the Richardson mansion. Just one room with a kitchenette and bathroom, furnished, with second-hand pieces she'd gradually acquired. But today, even this modest space felt different. Elena moved to the window, looking out at the city sprawled below. For 2 years she had lived a half-life, her true self buried under the necessity of survival. The piano had been her identity, her voice, her connection to something greater than herself. Without it, she had felt like a shadow moving through the world unseen. One note. That's all it had taken to bring her back to life. Elena picked up her phone and dialed the number for Professor Chen. Professor? It's Elena Vasquez from last night. Mrs. Richardson said you called about an audition? His voice was warm and enthusiastic. Elena. Yes, thank you for calling back. I spoke with the symphony director this morning. She's very interested in meeting you. There's an opening for a pianist to perform Beethoven's Emperor Concerto in their spring series. The scheduled performer had to withdraw for personal reasons. Would you be interested in auditioning? The Emperor Concerto, one of the most magnificent pieces in the piano repertoire. Elena had performed it once before, with the Caracas Philharmonic, 3 years ago. The music was still in her fingers, in her memory. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I would be very interested. Excellent. The audition is next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Can you make that time? Tuesday was a workday, but with her new arrangement at the Richardsons, it would be possible. Yes, I can be there. Wonderful. You'll need to prepare the first movement for the audition. Do you have the score? No, but I can get one. She would need to visit the music library, perhaps buy a copy if she could afford it. Don't worry about that. I'll have one sent to you today. What's your address? Elena gave him her apartment information, still feeling as though she was living someone else's life. Yesterday, she had been dusting furniture and preparing for a dinner party. Today, she was scheduling a symphony audition. After ending the call with Professor Chen, Elena made herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, trying to process everything that had happened. There was so much to think about. The visa application, the reduced hours at the Richardsons, the upcoming audition, the possibility of teaching again. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Ms. Vasquez? This is Howard Goldstein, Robert Richardson's attorney. He asked me to call you about your immigration situation. For the next hour, Elena discussed her background and options with the attorney. He asked detailed questions about her musical training, her previous performances, her press reviews and recordings. By the end of the call, he sounded confident. Based on what you've told me, I believe you have an excellent case for an O1 visa. Your international performances and training at a top conservatory establish you as an artist of extraordinary ability. I'll need documentation, of course. Programs from your concerts, reviews, letters from musical directors you've worked with. Elena's heart sank slightly. Most of my documentation is still in Venezuela. I have some things, but not much. That's not unusual in cases like yours, Howard assured her. We can work with what you have and request supporting letters. From new contacts here, Professor Chen, for instance, and the symphony director if your audition goes well. Robert mentioned you might be teaching his wife. Yes, we discussed that this morning. Good. Establishing yourself professionally here will strengthen your case. Can you come to my office tomorrow to begin the paperwork? Say 10 a.m. Another appointment. Another step toward reclaiming her true identity. Yes, I'll be there. Thank you so much for your help. It's my pleasure. Robert was quite moved by your performance last night. He's not easily impressed. After ending the call, Elena sat in silence for several minutes. Then, slowly, she walked to her closet and pulled out a small wooden box from the back corner. Inside were the few precious items she had brought from Venezuela, photographs of her family, her conservatory diploma, a few wrinkled programs from her most important performances, and a single review clipped from a Caracas newspaper that had called her a rising star in the classical firmament. These fragments of her previous life had been too painful to look at during the past 2 years. Now she spread them carefully on her small table, reconnecting with the person she had been before, the person she might become again. A knock at her door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, she found a courier holding a package. Delivery for Elena Vasquez. She signed for the package and brought it inside. Opening it revealed a brand new score of Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 5, The Emperor, along with a handwritten note from Professor Chen. Looking forward to your audition. The piano practice rooms at the conservatory are available to you anytime. Just show this note at the front desk. PC. Elena ran her fingers over the crisp pages of the score. The notes were old friends, waiting to be brought back to life. But where would she practice? Her apartment had no piano, and while the Richardsons had offered theirs, she would need many hours of uninterrupted practice to prepare for this audition. The conservatory practice rooms were the answer. Professional-grade pianos in private rooms, available whenever she needed them. It was an incredibly generous offer. Elena changed her clothes and gathered her few musical materials. There was no time to waste. 6 days until the audition. 6 days to bring back the technical precision and emotional depth needed for Beethoven's magnificent concerto. 6 days to prepare for the opportunity that might change everything. As she headed for the bus that would take her to the conservatory, Elena felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. For 2 years, she had been invisible, her talent and training hidden behind a uniform and a dusting cloth. Now suddenly, she was stepping back into the light. The practice room assigned to her was small but well-maintained, with a Yamaha grand piano that responded beautifully to her touch. Elena placed the score on the stand. Though she wouldn't need it much, the Emperor was still in her memory and her muscles. She began with scales and arpeggios, reawakening her technique after the long silence. Then slowly she started to play the opening of the concerto, those magnificent cascading chords that announce the soloist's presence with such authority. Her fingers were stiff at first, missing the daily practice that had once been as natural as breathing. But as the hours passed, the old facility began to return. By late afternoon, she was deep into the first movement, working through the challenging passages, remembering the interpretive choices she had made years earlier. Time disappeared as she worked. The sun set outside the small window of the practice room, but Elena barely noticed. She was home again, not in a physical place, but in the world of music where she truly belonged. A knock at the door finally broke her concentration. A security guard smiled apologetically. "Sorry to interrupt, but we're closing in 15 minutes. Just wanted to make sure you had time to gather your things." Elena glanced at the clock in surprise. She had been practicing for nearly 8 hours without a break. "Thank you. I'll be done shortly." As she packed up the score and her notes, Elena realized she was both exhausted and exhilarated. Her fingers ached pleasantly and her mind was full of the music. For the first time in years, she felt complete, as if a missing piece of herself had been restored. On the bus ride back to her apartment, Elena's phone chimed with a text message from Catherine Richardson. "Hope you had a good day off. The house is a disaster without you, but we're managing." Robert spoke with Howard. "Sounds like good news on the visa front. Thomas wants to know if you'd play for his friends this weekend. No pressure, just thought I'd ask. See you tomorrow?" The casual, friendly tone was so different from their previous interactions that Elena smiled to herself. Yesterday, communication from Mrs. Richardson would have been brief instructions about household tasks. Today it was almost like a message between friends. "Had a productive day," she typed back. "Started practicing for symphony audition next Tuesday. Happy to play for Thomas and friends this weekend. See you tomorrow at 10 a.m. As she pressed send, Elena realized that her life had divided neatly into before and after. Before, the invisible maid, dusting the piano she longed to play. After, the musician reclaiming her identity step by step, all because of a thoughtless joke that had revealed her true self to the world. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Elena divided her time between her reduced duties at HOA, the Richardson home, marathon practice sessions at the conservatory, and meetings with Howard about her visa application. Her life had transformed so quickly that sometimes she felt as though she was living in a dream. On Friday afternoon, she arrived at the Richardson house to find Catherine waiting eagerly by the piano. "There you are," Catherine said, looking more relaxed than Elena had ever seen her. Gone was the perfectly coiffed society wife who gave orders without making eye contact. In her place was an enthusiastic woman in casual clothes, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "I hope you're still willing to give me that piano lesson," Catherine said. "I dug out some beginner books from when Thomas was little." Elena sat down her bag and smiled. Of course. Let's see what we're working with. For the next hour, Elena guided Catherine through the basics: proper posture, hand position, the names of the keys. Catherine was a surprisingly dedicated student, focusing intently on each instruction and practicing the simple five-finger exercises without complaint. You have a natural feel for the keyboard, Elena observed as Catherine worked through a basic C major scale. Catherine laughed. That's very kind of you to say, but I know I'm terrible. Still, it feels good to be learning something new at my age. Age has nothing to do with learning music, Elena assured her. I had a student in Caracas who started at 72 and performed in a recital 2 years later. Well, I don't have any recital ambitions, Catherine said. I just want to be able to play a few simple pieces for my own enjoyment. As they continued with the lesson, Elena was struck by how much their relationship had changed. The power dynamic that had defined their interactions for 2 years had shifted into something more balanced, more human. After the lesson, Catherine insisted that Elena stay for tea. They sat in the kitchen, another first, as Elena had always eaten her quick meals alone during her brief breaks. Thomas is bringing some friends over tomorrow evening, Catherine mentioned, pouring tea into delicate cups. He told them about your playing and they're quite excited to hear you. I hope that's still all right? Of course, Elena said. I'm happy to play for them. He's invited quite different friends this time, Catherine noted. Music students mostly. I think he's trying to impress them by having you perform. Elena smiled at the irony. Just a week ago, Thomas had invited her to play as a joke, expecting her to embarrass herself. Now he was using her talent to elevate his own social standing. How is the preparation for your audition coming along? Catherine asked. Well, I think the music is coming back to me. I just need more time to refine it. And your meeting with Howard? Robert said it went well. Elena nodded. He believes we have a strong case for the O1 visa. We've started gathering documentation. Catherine looked thoughtful. You know, I was thinking about something. We have connections with several people on the symphony board. Perhaps some letters of recommendation might help with your application. That would be incredibly helpful, Elena admitted. Consider it done. I'll make some calls this afternoon. The casual offer of assistance from someone with social influence was another reminder of how Elena's world had changed. A week ago, Catherine Richardson wouldn't have used her connections to help the household maid, but now she was offering, without hesitation. That evening, Elena returned to the conservatory for another long practice session. The Emperor Concerto was coming together, but she knew she needed every available minute to prepare properly. As she worked through the challenging cadenza in the first movement, she barely noticed someone entering the practice room until they spoke. Impressive technique. Elena turned to find Professor Chen standing in the doorway, listening with an appraising expression. Thank you, she said, slightly embarrassed to be caught in the middle of her practice. I'm still working out some rough spots. Your interpretation is quite traditional, he observed. But you bring a personal warmth, too. That's refreshing. The symphony committee will appreciate that. He stepped into the room. I came to let you know that the director has added 2 more candidates to Tuesday's audition. Both are from prestigious conservatories with considerable performance experience. Elena felt her stomach tighten. I see. Don't be discouraged, Professor Chen said quickly. You have something special, authenticity that can't be taught. But I wanted you to be prepared for the competition. Thank you for telling me, Elena replied, trying to hide her anxiety. I'll just have to practice harder. Professor Chen smiled. That's the right attitude. I've reserved this room for you all weekend, by the way. It's yours from 8 a.m. until closing, Saturday and Sunday. The generosity of his support touched her deeply. I don't know how to thank you for all your help. No thanks needed. Music is a universal language that transcends borders and circumstances. Those of us who speak this language must support each other. He turned to leave, then added, By the way, I'll be attending Thomas Richardson's gathering tomorrow. I'm curious to hear you play in a more intimate setting. After he left, Elena returned to the piano with renewed determination. The stakes had just gotten higher. Competition from conservatory-trained pianists meant she would need to be at her absolute best. 2 years away from regular practice had left gaps in her technique that only intensive work could fill. She practiced until her fingers ached, and security again reminded her of the closing time. On the bus ride home, she mentally played through the concerto, visualizing each passage, each transition, each emotional nuance. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. Elena arrived at the Richardson house at 10, completing her abbreviated list of duties efficiently before retreating to the piano for practice. Catherine had cleared her schedule to give Elena uninterrupted access to the instrument until the evening gathering. "Play as long as you need," Catherine insisted. "We'll be out until dinner. The house is yours." Alone in the grand living room, Elena lost herself in the music. The Richardsons' piano had a warmer tone than the conservatory's Yamaha, requiring subtle adjustments to her touch. She worked methodically through the concerto, recording herself on her phone, then listening critically to identify areas needing improvement. By late afternoon, she had made significant progress. The technical passages were cleaner, the lyrical sections more expressive. Elena was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice Thomas returning until he spoke. "That sounds amazing," he said from the doorway. "Way better than the boring guy who played it at the symphony last year." Elena looked up, startled. "Thank you. I didn't hear you come in." Thomas shrugged. "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. My friends will be here in about an hour. No pressure or anything, but they're all pretty serious music people. Some of them study at the conservatory." The slight nervousness in his voice was new. The arrogant young man who had mockingly invited her to play was now worried about impressing his friends with her performance. "What would you like me to play? For them?" Elena asked. "Whatever you want. They'll be blown away no matter what." He hesitated, then added, "Just not something too simple, okay? I might have talked you up a bit." Elena smiled. "I'll make sure your friends are impressed. Thanks." He turned to go, then stopped. "Hey, I've been meaning to ask, what's it like? Playing like that, I mean. Being that good at something." The question caught her off guard. "It's hard to explain. When I'm playing at my best, it feels like I'm not really controlling my fingers, like the music is just flowing through me." Thomas nodded slowly. "Sounds amazing. I've never been that good at anything. Have you ever wanted to be?" He looked thoughtful. "Never really tried. I guess everything's always come pretty easy. The best things usually require effort," Elena said gently. "Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out." He gave her an awkward smile. "Anyway, my friends will be here soon. I should get ready." As he left, Elena reflected on how different Thomas seemed from the entitled young man who had humiliated her just a week ago. Perhaps witnessing her talent had shown him a different way of measuring human worth, not by wealth or status, but by dedication and skill. By 7 o'clock, the living room had filled with Thomas's friends. About 15 young people, mostly music students, as Catherine had mentioned. Professor Chen arrived as well, along with 2 other faculty members from the conservatory. Robert and Catherine moved among the guests, offering drinks and appearing much more relaxed than at their formal dinner party. Elena felt strangely nervous. These weren't wealthy business associates who knew nothing about music. These were students and teachers who could recognize every technical flaw, every interpretive choice. She had chosen her program carefully. Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the piece that had started it all, a Bach prelude and fugue to demonstrate her classical technique, and Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue to show versatility. Thomas called for everyone's attention. "So, thanks for coming. As I mentioned, we have a special performance tonight." He glanced at Elena. "This is Elena Vasquez. She's an amazing pianist from Venezuela, and she's going to play for us." The simple introduction, with no mention of her role as the family's maid, was another small sign of how things had changed. Elena took her place at the piano, adjusted the bench, and began with Bach. The clean, precise counterpoint filled the room. The young audience listened with genuine appreciation, some closing their eyes to focus on the intricate musical lines. When she finished, their applause was enthusiastic and knowing, the response of people who understood what they had heard. She moved to Chopin next. As she played the opening bars, Elena caught Catherine's eye. The woman smiled and nodded slightly, remembering the night this piece had changed everything. The ballade flowed from Elena's fingers with even more confidence than at the dinner party, her interpretation deepened by the hours of recent practice. When she reached the final explosive passages, she could feel the audience's collective breath, being held. The last chords resonated through the room, followed by a moment of silence before enthusiastic applause broke out. For her final piece, Elena launched into Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, with its jazz-influenced rhythms and bluesy harmonies. It was a bold choice after the classical selections, but Elena wanted to show her range. The younger audience members especially responded to the energy and modern sensibility of the piece. As the final notes died away, the room erupted in cheers and applause. Thomas looked prouder than if he had played the pieces himself. Professor. Chen approached first. Magnificent, Elena. Truly magnificent. If you play the Beethoven with that level of confidence on Tuesday, the job will be yours. Others gathered around, asking questions about her training, her interpretive choices, her favorite composers. No one treated her as the help, or seemed surprised that someone who worked as a maid could play at such a level. They spoke to her, as a fellow musician, a colleague. One young woman, a piano student herself, asked shyly, "Would you consider taking private students? I could learn so much from you." The question sparked several similar requests. By the end of the evening, Elena had tentative arrangements to teach 4 private students, with the Richardsons' piano offered as the lesson location until she had her own instrument again. As the gathering began to wind down, Robert approached her with a small group of older guests. "Elena, I'd like you to meet some friends of ours. George is on the symphony board, Helen chairs the Community Arts Foundation, and David runs the International Musicians Residency Program." The introductions were made with obvious intent. These were people who could help further Elena's re-emergence into the musical world. They exchanged cards and promises to stay in touch, with specific mentions of upcoming opportunities that might suit her talents. By the time the last guests departed, Elena was overwhelmed with the possibilities that had opened up in a single evening. Teaching opportunities, performance possibilities, professional connections, all the elements needed to rebuild her career. Catherine found her sitting quietly at the piano after everyone had gone. "You were wonderful tonight," she said, sitting beside Elena on the bench. Everyone was impressed. "Thank you for making it possible," Elena replied, "for everything you and your family have done this week." Catherine looked slightly embarrassed. "We're just correcting a wrong. You should never have been cleaning houses in the first place. Many talented people do all kinds of work to survive," Elena said softly. "I was luckier than most. I found my way back to music." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Catherine spoke again. "I've been thinking about something. This piano, it's just sitting here most of the time. Even if I practice daily, that's only an hour or so. You need an instrument of your own, especially if you'll be teaching." Elena nodded. "Eventually, when I can afford it." "No," Catherine said firmly. "Now. We want you to have this one." Elena stared at her in shock. "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Catherine insisted. "We'll buy another for the house. This one belongs with someone who can truly bring out its voice. Someone like you." The offer was so unexpected, so generous that Elena couldn't find words to respond. "Think of it as an investment in your future," Catherine continued. "When you're playing with major orchestras again, we'll say we knew you when." Finally, Elena managed to say, "Thank you. I don't know how I'll get it to my apartment, though. It's quite small." Catherine waved away the concern. "We'll help you find a better place. Something with room for a grand piano and teaching space. Howard mentioned that your O1 visa application would be strengthened by showing you have the means to sustain your career here. A proper piano and studio space are part of that." The casual offer of such significant help, a piano, a larger apartment, would have seemed like charity a week ago. Now somehow it felt like partnership. The Richardsons weren't just helping their former maid, they were investing in an artist they believed in. Sunday passed in a blur of practice. Elena divided her time between the conservatory's practice room and the Richardsons' piano, working tirelessly on the Beethoven concerto. By evening, she felt as prepared as possible given the limited time. The music was secure in her fingers and in her heart. Monday morning, she met again with Howard to review her visa application. The attorney looked pleased as he added letters of recommendation from Professor Chen and several board members of the symphony. "Your case is getting stronger by the day," he told her. "These endorsements from prominent musicians and arts organizations are exactly what we need." That afternoon, Elena returned to the Richardson house to find an unexpected visitor waiting. A slender man with gray hair and sharp eyes sat in the living room, examining the piano with professional interest. Catherine made the introductions. "Elena, this is Mr. Abramowitz from Steinway. He's here to evaluate our piano and discuss options for both you and us." Mr. Abramowitz stood and shook Elena's hand. "Mrs. Richardson tells me you're a concert pianist. I'd love to hear you play before we discuss the details." Slightly bewildered by this new development, Elena sat at the piano and played a short Chopin nocturne. The man listened intently, his eyes closed. "Beautiful touch," he commented when she finished. "Very sensitive to the instrument. Now, Mrs. Richardson has explained the situation. You need a performance-grade instrument for your career restart, and the Richardsons need a replacement for this one." He opened his portfolio. "I've brought information on several options. For you, I would recommend our Model B. 7 feet, perfect for teaching and chamber performances. For the Richardsons, perhaps the Model M, smaller but still excellent tone for a home setting." Elena listened in astonishment as Catherine and Mr. Abramowitz discussed the details as if purchasing 2 Steinway grand pianos was a routine shopping trip. When numbers were mentioned, numbers with many zeros, Elena tried to protest. "I can't possibly afford—" "It's an investment," Catherine interrupted firmly. "With favorable terms arranged through the Steinway Artist Program. Mr. Abramowitz assures me that with your background, you'll qualify once your visa situation is resolved." The piano dealer nodded. "Many of our artists begin with sponsorship arrangements. In your case, the Richardsons would provide the initial investment, and you would gradually assume ownership through your teaching and performance income. Quite standard in the industry." Nothing about this felt standard to Elena, but she recognized the extraordinary opportunity being offered. A Steinway of her own, the dream of every serious pianist, made possible through the generosity of people who had barely noticed her existence a week ago. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say yes," Catherine replied simply. "Say you'll accept our help so that your talent can be shared with the world again." Elena looked at the piano that had changed her life with a single note. "Yes. Thank you." Mr. Abramowitz closed his portfolio with satisfaction. "Excellent. We'll proceed with the arrangements. The Model B for Ms. Vasquez can be delivered to her new address once it's established, and the Model M for the Richardson family can replace this instrument next week." After he left, Elena turned to Catherine. "I don't know how I'll ever repay this kindness." "By playing," Catherine said. "By teaching, by sharing your gift. That's the only repayment we want." She smiled. "Well, that and continuing my lessons. I've been practicing my C major scale religiously." The rest of the day passed in final preparations for Tuesday's audition. Elena practiced late into the evening at the conservatory, refining the last details of her interpretation. By the time she returned to her small apartment, she felt as ready as she could be. As she lay in bed that night, Elena reflected on the extraordinary week that had passed. From invisible maid to recognized artist in 7 days, from dusting a piano to being gifted one, from hiding her talent to preparing for a symphony audition, all because of a thoughtless joke that had revealed her true self to the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, competing against conservatory-trained pianists for a prestigious position, But for the first time in years, Elena faced the future not with resignation but with hope. Whatever happened at the audition, she had reclaimed her identity as a musician. She had found her voice again, and that, in itself, was a kind of victory. Tuesday, morning arrived with a clarity that seemed almost symbolic. The sky was a perfect blue, the air crisp and clean after overnight rain. Elena woke early, her mind already running through passages of the Beethoven concerto. Today was audition day. She dressed carefully in her best outfit, a simple black dress she had purchased for her cousin's wedding back in Venezuela. It wasn't ideal for a professional audition, but it was the most formal thing she owned. Catherine had offered to take her shopping, but Elena had politely declined. This journey back to music was happening so quickly. She needed to keep some things under her own control. The morning passed in gentle preparation. Rather than exhausting herself with last-minute practice, Elena did what she had always done before important performances. She visualized the music, running through it mentally while her hands traced silent patterns on the kitchen table. At noon, her phone rang. It was Catherine. "Just calling to wish you luck today, though I know you don't need it. Talent like yours makes its own luck." "Thank you," Elena replied, touched by the gesture. "I'm nervous but ready, I think. Robert and I wanted to come support you, but Professor Chen suggested it might add pressure. We'll be thinking of you, though." The casual warmth in Catherine's voice was still surprising. In just 1 week, they had moved from employer and employee to something like friends. "That means a lot to me," Elena said sincerely. "Oh, and Howard called this morning. He submitted your preliminary O1 visa application. He says things look very promising. The letters from the arts community made a strong impression. Another piece of good news to carry with her into the audition. Please thank Robert for arranging Howard's help. It's made such a difference." "No thanks needed. We're just happy to see things working out for you. Call us after the audition. No matter how it goes, we'd love to hear about it." After ending the call, Elena gathered her things and headed for the bus that would take her to the symphony hall. The familiar weight of anxiety settled in her stomach, not fear exactly, but the heightened awareness that always preceded important performances. The symphony hall was an imposing structure of glass and stone in the center of the city. Elena had passed it many times during her 2 years here, but had never been inside. Now, climbing the broad steps to the entrance, she felt both like a stranger and like someone returning home. Concert halls had been her natural habitat once. In the lobby, a young woman at a desk directed her to the backstage area where the auditions were being held. "You're Elena Vasquez? You're the last one today. 2 candidates have already played." The news sent a fresh wave of nerves through Elena's body. Being last meant the committee would inevitably compare her to the others they had heard. But it also meant her performance would be the freshest in their minds when they made their decision. Backstage, she could hear the faint sound of the Emperor Concerto being played. Her competition, currently performing the same piece she would soon play. Even from a distance, she could tell the pianist was technically excellent, clean, precise, and methodical. Professor Chen spotted her and came over. "Ah, Elena. Good, you're here. How are you feeling?" "Ready," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "How many candidates are there?" "3, including you. The young man playing now is from Juilliard. Before him was a woman who studied in Vienna, both very accomplished." Elena nodded, trying not to let this intimidate her. "I understand." "Remember what I told you," Professor Chen said quietly. "Technical perfection is expected at this level. What will set you apart is your voice, the unique way you communicate through the music. Don't try to impress them with speed or volume. Speak to them through Beethoven." His advice calmed her somehow. Yes, her competitors had advantages: continuous training at prestigious institutions, regular access to instruments, performance opportunities that had kept their skills sharp. But Elena had something too: life experiences that informed her understanding of the music, a perspective shaped by both triumph and hardship. The sounds from the stage grew louder as the current performer reached the cadenza, that magical, Moment in the concerto where the orchestra falls silent and the pianist speaks alone. Elena listened critically. The young man's playing was impressive, his technique flawless. But there was something calculated about his interpretation, as if each expressive nuance had been carefully planned rather than deeply felt. A few minutes later, the music concluded to polite applause from the committee. The young man emerged, backstage looking confident. He nodded briefly to Elena before gathering his things and leaving. A stage manager approached her. "Ms. Vasquez, they're ready for you." Taking a deep breath, Elena followed the woman onto the stage. The auditorium was mostly empty, with just 7 people sitting in the center section: the music director, principal conductor, and several board members. Professor Chen had joined them, sitting slightly apart as an observer rather than a voting member. At center stage stood a magnificent Steinway concert grand, its lid raised to project the sound into the hall. Elena approached it with reverence, adjusting the bench to her height, taking a moment to feel the weight and response of the keys. The music director, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair, spoke first. "Good afternoon, Ms. Vasquez. Professor, Chen has told us about your background. Please begin when you're ready." Elena placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Then, with deliberate confidence, she played the opening chords of Beethoven's Emperor Concerto. From the first notes, she knew this performance would be different from her practice sessions. Something about the acoustics of the hall, the responsive action of the piano, and the high stakes of the moment combined to elevate her playing. Her fingers moved with unusual clarity and precision, finding subtle colors in the instrument that she hadn't accessed before. As she moved deeper into the first movement, Elena felt herself disappearing into the music. Technical concerns fell away, replaced by pure expression. The triumphant themes, the tender passages, the architectural grandeur of Beethoven's conception, all flowed through her as if she were a channel rather than a performer. When she reached the cadenza, that extended solo passage where the pianist's artistry is fully exposed, Elena took a slightly slower tempo than she had practiced. She wanted every note to speak, every phrase to breathe. The familiar patterns unfolded under her fingers with newfound meaning, as if she were discovering the music for the first time while playing it. By the time she reached the movement's conclusion, Elena had forgotten about the committee, the competition, even her own journey back to music. There was only Beethoven, speaking through time, and her humble role as his interpreter. The final chords resonated through the hall, followed by a moment of complete silence. Elena's hands rested on the keys as the sound gradually faded away. Then slowly she became aware of her surroundings again. The stage lights, the committee members watching her, the weight of the moment. The music director was the first to speak. "Thank you, Ms. Vasquez, that was most illuminating." Her professional demeanor couldn't quite hide the emotion in her voice. "Would you mind waiting outside while we deliberate?" Elena nodded and made her way backstage, her heart pounding. The careful neutrality of the director's response gave no hint of their decision. All she could do was wait. Backstage, she paced quietly, trying to assess her own performance objectively. There had been a few small technical slips, moments. Were her fingers still rebuilding their strength and speed after 2 years of disuse? Hadn't quite achieved perfection, but the musical interpretation had come from somewhere deep and true. She had played with her whole self, her whole history. Would it be enough? The other candidates had impeccable credentials and technique. They hadn't taken a 2-year hiatus from playing. They hadn't spent their recent days dusting furniture instead of practicing Beethoven. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, the stage manager reappeared. "They'd like you to come back in." Elena returned to the stage, trying to read the expressions of the committee members. Professor Chen caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The music director stood. "Ms. Vasquez, we've heard 3 excellent pianists today. All of you brought different strengths to this challenging concerto." Elena held her breath, preparing herself for either outcome. What we're looking for is not just technical mastery, but an artist who can speak to our audience, someone who brings Beethoven to life for both seasoned concert-goers and newcomers to classical music. The director stepped forward. Your performance had a rare quality, an authenticity and emotional depth that can't be taught. There were some technical considerations, certainly, but the musicality of your interpretation was exceptional. She extended her hand. We would be pleased to offer you the position of guest soloist for our May concert series, performing the Emperor Concerto with our orchestra. Elena's legs felt suddenly weak. She had done it. Against all odds, after 2 years, away from music, competing against conservatory-trained pianists, she had won the position. "Thank you," she managed to say, shaking the director's hand. "I'm honored, truly honored." "There will be details to work out," the director continued. "Rehearsal schedules, promotional appearances, program notes. Our manager will be in touch with the specifics. We typically begin rehearsals 8 weeks before the performance." As Elena left the symphony hall 30 minutes later, contract in hand, the reality of what had happened was still sinking in. She had a performance date with a professional orchestra. She had a visa application in process that would allow her to work legally as a musician. She had teaching opportunities developing, a Steinway being arranged, and supportive new friends in the Richardsons. 1 week. It had taken just 1 week for her life to transform completely. The bus ride back to the Richardson house passed in a blur of emotion. Elena had promised to let them know the results immediately, and she wanted to share this moment in person rather than over the phone. When she arrived, she found not just Catherine and Robert waiting, but Thomas as well. They were gathered in the living room, trying to look casual but clearly anxious for news. "Well?" Catherine asked as soon as Elena walked in. "How did it go?" Elena couldn't hold back her smile. "I got it. I'll be performing the Emperor Concerto with the symphony in May." Their reactions were immediate and joyful. Catherine embraced her warmly. Robert shook her hand with genuine pride, and Thomas gave an enthusiastic whoop that seemed completely out of character for him. "I knew it," Catherine exclaimed. "I just knew they would recognize your talent." "This calls for a celebration," Robert declared, heading for the wine cabinet. "A proper one." As he poured champagne, the same expensive brand Elena had served at the dinner party just over a week ago, the symmetry of the moment wasn't lost on any of them. Last week, she had been the invisible server. Today, she was the guest of honor. "To Elena," Robert said, raising his glass. "And to new beginnings." They all drank to the toast, and for a moment, the four of them simply smiled at each other, acknowledging without words the extraordinary journey they had shared. Thomas broke the silence first. "So what happens now with the symphony and everything?" Elena explained about the rehearsal schedule, the promotional events, the preparations for the May performance. As she spoke, she could see the reality of her new life taking shape. "And Howard called this morning," Catherine added. "The O1 visa application is moving forward. He says it's one of the strongest cases he's handled recently." Robert nodded in agreement. "With the symphony contract and teaching positions developing, plus the letters of recommendation we've gathered, Howard believes your approval is very likely." "I still can't believe how much has happened in just 1 week," Elena said softly. "A week that started with a thoughtless joke," Thomas acknowledged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Not my finest moment." "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns," Robert observed. Who could have predicted that Thomas's poor judgment would lead to all this? They laughed together, the former tension of their employer-employee relationship completely dissolved. As the impromptu celebration continued, Catherine pulled Elena aside. "Mr. Abramowitz called this morning. Your Steinway has been selected. They've found a Model B with a particularly warm tone that he thinks will suit your playing style perfectly." "I still can't quite believe you're doing this for me," Elena admitted. "Consider it a long overdue correction of an injustice," Catherine replied. "Your talent deserves a worthy instrument." Later, as evening approached, Elena prepared to leave for her apartment. She had a lesson to plan for her first student the following day. Catherine herself, who had insisted that their arrangement continue despite Elena's changing circumstances. "You know," Catherine said as she walked Elena to the door, "we've been thinking. This house is quite large for just the three of us, especially with Thomas away at college most of the year. The east wing has a separate entrance and its own small kitchen. It would make a perfect studio apartment and teaching space." Elena looked at her in surprise. "Are you suggesting that you move in?" "Yes, at least until you find a suitable place of your own. The Steinway could be delivered directly here, and you could begin teaching immediately. No rent, of course. Consider it part of our sponsorship of your career restart." The offer was unexpected but practical. Elena's tiny apartment could never accommodate a grand piano or provide teaching space, and with the reduced hours she now worked for the Richardsons, the arrangement made sense for everyone. "I'd have to think about it," she said carefully. "It's such a generous offer." "Of course, take your time." Catherine smiled. "But know that the option is there if you want it." As Elena rode the bus back to her apartment that evening, she watched the city pass by with new eyes. Streets she had traveled for 2 years as an invisible worker now seemed full of possibility. The symphony hall she had passed countless times without entering would soon be her performance venue. The conservatory would be a place where she might eventually teach. Her phone chimed with a message from Professor Chen. "Congratulations." The committee was unanimous. "Rehearsals begin March 15th. Coffee tomorrow to discuss details." Another message followed, this one from Howard. "Excellent news about the symphony position. Perfect timing for the O1 application. Meeting with immigration officials next week looking promising." Each notification represented another thread in the new fabric of her life, a life rebuilt around music rather than survival. Back in her small apartment, Elena sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the talented child in Caracas who had fallen in love with the piano, to the promising young artist performing with orchestras across South America, to the desperate immigrant taking any work she could find, to the maid dusting a silent piano day after day. And now, this new chapter. Soloist with the symphony. Teacher. Artist. Returning to her true identity after years in the shadows. All because of a thoughtless joke at a dinner party. All because a young man had invited the maid to play piano, expecting humiliation, but revealing extraordinary talent instead. One note. That's all it had taken to change everything. One note to remind the world and herself of who she truly was. Elena looked down at her hands, the pianist's hands that had never lost their memory despite 2 years of disuse. Tomorrow, they would begin teaching Catherine. Next week, they would start preparing seriously for the symphony performance. Soon, they would have a Steinway of their own to bring to life. Outside her window, a light rain began to fall, painting the city streets with reflections of the streetlights. Elena smiled at the beauty of it. The ordinary transformed into something magical by a change in perspective, just like her life. 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at the Symphony Hall, dressed in a flowing gown that Catherine had insisted on purchasing for the occasion. Through the curtain she could hear the orchestra tuning, the murmur of the audience settling into their seats. So much had changed since her audition on this same stage. The O1 visa had been approved, officially recognizing her as an alien of extraordinary ability in the arts. She had moved into the east wing of the Richardson home, transforming it into a comfortable apartment and teaching studio. The Steinway Model B had arrived, its rich singing tone becoming an extension of her own voice. She now had 12 private students, with a waiting list growing longer each week. Her teaching reputation had spread quickly, attracting everyone, from children showing early promise to adults returning to music after long absences. The income allowed her to send money home to her family in Venezuela and to begin saving for a place of her own. The Richardsons had become not just supporters, but genuine friends. Catherine diligently practiced her scales in simple pieces, taking childlike delight in her progress. Robert had become an enthusiastic attendee at classical concerts, often asking Elena for recommendations on recordings and performances. And Thomas, home from college for the summer, had developed a genuine interest in music, asking Elena to teach him basic piano and regularly attending chamber music events. 5 minutes, Ms. Vasquez, the stage manager announced, interrupting her. Thoughts. Elena took a deep breath, centering herself for the performance ahead. In the front row of the audience sat the Richardsons, along with Professor Chen and Howard. Representatives from several other orchestras were attending as well, alerted by the growing buzz about a remarkable Venezuelan pianist making her American debut. This performance would not be the end of her journey, but rather a new beginning. There would be more concerts, more teaching, more music to explore. The path ahead was no longer shrouded in uncertainty, but illuminated by possibility. As the orchestra finished the first movement of the program, the conductor announced her name. The audience applauded as Elena walked onto the stage, bowed gracefully, and took her place at the piano. For a moment, as the hall fell silent, she thought of that night at the Richardson dinner party, the night she had been invited to play as a joke, the night that had changed everything. Then the conductor raised his baton, the orchestra began the majestic introduction to Beethoven's Emperor Concerto, and Elena prepared to join them. Her fingers hovered above the keys, ready to bring the music to life. One note. That's all it would take to begin.